And welcome back to K&M Geekly. It's your geekly peek at a weekly peekly deekly deek.
Wow, starting strong. Yeah. Wait. A weekly geek and your peekly weekly peek-a-deek? Is that what you said? Somebody watching this, right? There's going to be closed captions that YouTube is going to do. I would like a transcription of that closed caption of whatever that was, and I want it on a T-shirt.
That's the equivalent of a Randy Savage or Ultimate Warrior style promo right there.
Yes, exactly. Destrucity.
We're continuing a conversation about professional wrestling. We started last week. Hopefully you enjoyed the first half of our interview. We're still talking because, it's one thing to look on the internet or to watch on TV for all these years, to be a fan, to have all the knowledge. But it's another thing to actually get in there and to get some of those bumps in and bumps and bruises. And Nick, talk about what the transition was. You were in college. You were at Penn State. And you decided to take your passion to a different level. Talk about what went into that thinking.
Graduating, Keith and I, again, Keith, we were talking about this kind of before, if we could go back to our 20s and, what could we, if we could know what we know now and just, make a couple tweaks and changes there. But there's not a whole lot I would have changed, to be honest with you. I was coming out of college. I had been a cheerleader at Penn State. I was the Nittany Lion mascot, which... it's funny, people today, when they want to talk about anything from my past, it's never pro wrestling. It's always the Nittany Lion mascot stuff. And while I loved that experience at Penn State, and while that's, given me many opportunities, I'd much rather talk pro wrestling. And yet very rarely do I get a chance to do it. So anyway, back then it was the dawn of the internet. I was able to find AFA and the Wild Samoan Wrestling School online. It was 2 hours from where I was working in State College. So on a very, very wintry day in a blizzard, mind you, Rick, my partner Rick from the Rick and Nick Excellent Adventure podcast, he drove out with me to a very cold and dark and dingy VFW in Hazleton, and I had my tryout. And I sat down afterwards with AFA, and he gave me some very positive feedback, and said that there could be a future in this if I wanted to work for it, which I obviously did, and I started training. And what people don't realize. Oh, sorry, Keith, go ahead.
I was going to ask, what was the tryout? Had you done any wrestling before, or did you have anything to show?
Well, so backyard wrestling, which is completely the worst form of pro wrestling there is because it's dangerous.
Just throwing Mike around.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Mike took so many DDTs. Not only should he be dead, he should be. I mean, his brain should be studied for post-concussion syndrome. Probably. True. So the tryout was basically the first part of it was a fitness tryout. So some running, push-ups, sit-ups. I would say like basic training, basic military training type things that you would see in the beginning parts of any like Army training. And then they taught some very, very basic introductions to a bump, like your basic back bump, just to see if you had enough coordination to kind of pull that off. So I was able to incorporate a lot of the stuff that gymnastic, I had a gymnastics background from my time at Penn State. So I wrapped all that in and, made it pretty clear that I was someone who physically could do it. And, also at that time, people would try to get in right around the time they turn 18 and not necessarily go to college first. So I waited till after college and had, I was, I'm not saying the other guys weren't, they definitely were, but I also had like a degree and there were other things I could offer in terms of like a skill set that I was bringing to them. So that's kind of how it started. And I was, teaching and I started wrestling all around the same time. In terms of the bumps and bruises, the one thing I hate more than anything is when people say wrestling's fake. It's not fake. It's predetermined. Absolutely. But what we do is very real. And here I am at, 46 years old, needing a shoulder replacement, arthritis in my hand from breaking my thumb. My toes do not look anything like what toes should look like from the number of times I've broken them doing the shooting star press from the top rope. It's a litany of injuries, lower back, concussions, you name it. Now, that's not to say any of those are good things. However, when people are telling you what you're doing isn't real, it's like, well, I beg to differ.
So,
It's quite
you
real.
you use the word bump. Now I know what that means because I'm a nerd now. But like when you say like what a basic back bump is, like what is that to the layperson?
Yeah. So the first thing you learn how to do when you become a pro wrestler is you learn how to fall. Okay, and there's only a few different ways, but you have to perfect them. The back bump is when you see someone get knocked down and they fall backwards and land on their back. A front bump is when someone falls forward and lands on their stomach. A no hands bump is when someone does like a front somersault and lands on their back. Those are the basics of any move you are going to take from someone's offense. That's how you land. That's how you protect yourself when someone is doing a move to you. The second part of that, when you're learning, is you learn how to administer an offense and protect the person you are doing that to. So every move that happens in pro wrestling is two-phased. I'm doing something to you, and you have to protect yourself while I'm doing it. So it's the level of trust required between two people in a professional wrestling match is maybe the most important thing. And I still argue today that the best pro wrestlers are guys like Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels, who were exceptional at the concept. We call it selling. Selling is when you're making the other person's offense look good, right? If I'm in a match and I no-sell you, a no-sell means you do a move to me and I make it look like it didn't hurt me, then all I'm doing is showing that you're weak. And why would anyone sitting in the audience want to see me fight someone who isn't as strong as me, or maybe stronger, or maybe faster, or maybe smarter? I have to make it believable. So big picture, for anyone getting into wrestling or anyone who is a wrestler, if you're not making your opponent look spectacular, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So you can't get over without putting your opponent over. And all of that starts with protection. So those are the first things you learn in pro wrestling school. I was fortunate to go to a school where I had Afa and Samu there, who were, they're Hall of Famers, in the WWE. So they also taught us the tricks in the trade of how to work yourself in a locker room, how people will try to physically hurt you in a ring and take advantage of you, and how you can kind of stand up as opposition to that. And also developing your character and what story you're telling and who you're going to be. And that's a topic I really could go on for hours about. Keith, when we were talking about things we would do differently, my character, Zero Gravity, I like that as a name, and so did my friend Kathy, who was one of the female wrestlers at the time. She's like, that's different. People aren't using a first and last name that aren't like John Smith or something like that. But I was hell-bent on I wanted to have the best match on the show every night, whether I was the first match or the last match. I wanted it to be the best. I wanted people to know that they were going to get something that was athletic and really great. I wish maybe I had made my character in the beginning even more comedic, so that I could have sold that part of it as well. Because over time, it got harder and harder to go in cold to a place and wrestle the type of style that I had to wrestle. And those are lessons you learn kind of as you go through the business and things like that.
Yeah, if I want to actually take a different avenue real quick. So that's kind of your inception, because I want to come back and talk a lot about something since we've been talking a lot about in life, which is what you guys talked about, going back, if you could go back again. And I think often, you think about the different pursuits you've had in life, be it theatrical, be it professional, be it in wrestling, and you think back about the what ifs or the opportunities lost. I want to reframe the conversation, actually, but before we do that, Nick, I want to actually fast forward. When was it that you either reached or you were presented with the crossroads that said you can't go any further, or was it you could go further, but there will be sacrifices that you chose against? So let's go to that junction point where what was the off ramp for you? We talked about getting in. What was the off ramp?
There's never a total off ramp in pro wrestling. Pro wrestlers never retire, ever. Ric Flair, perfect example of that. And I'm not going to name names at all, other than to say that I had a lot of opportunities that were granted to me being a student of AFA and part of the Wild Samoan family. Anyone who's getting into wrestling those are the people you seek out, right? Those are if you know Rafa still has an active promotion in school down in Florida, outside of Orlando. Samu still trains, and that family tree, that lineage goes all around. Supremely Great, one of my buddies, runs the Sanctuary in Pennsylvania, in Hazleton. These are all good places to go and train. I was scouted by both organizations during my early part of my career. I was small. That picture there was 2007, but I was probably even 30 pounds smaller than that when I had started out. They wanted me to be bigger, which it does mean, you probably have to, do some cycles of anabolics to kind of make that happen, to look a certain way and still be able to do the things you do. And instead of going that route, I talked to Afa about going over to Japan. So Afa had a lot of connections and a lot of the promotions over there. We were working on a 6-month or a 12-month stint over in Japan, because you can't just go over for a short period. It's longer commitments that you make over there. And it was right around that time that, as you know, Mike, our dad got sick. We knew it wasn't going to be the type of thing he recovers from. So it was either move home to the King of Prussia area and kind of be with the family and embrace education as the means of providing a paycheck that was consistent every couple of weeks, and we could keep things together, or go to Japan and, go whole hog on the pro wrestling thing. So as we've come to learn recently, after some interesting talks we've had with whether it's our therapists individually or Dr. Lisa Stroman at the PA Principals Conference, that really wasn't even a choice, although it kind of felt like a crossroads or a choice for me at the time. So I obviously went the other direction. Pro wrestling became a hobby instead of a full-time pursuit anymore. And there's a big difference from when you're doing it as a hobby versus, trying to make it full-time.
So awesome. So I want to provide you an opportunity now, and then we're going to pepper you with some questions. But so having the start point and the end point there, obviously, like you mentioned, through therapy and through just maybe hereditary clinical depression or other things that we might be circling in our family, it's very easy to see those crossroads or as missed opportunities, or as roads that you didn't get to travel that maybe you would have loved. And maybe, you could, what if, I wonder if I had gone to Japan, what life would have been. But that's not that's not the world we live in. That's not the reality we inhabit. So I want to give you an opportunity now, before we ask you specific questions, to go back over the time where you were in the pros, where you were doing shows, you were training full time, you were putting your whole hog, heart, and soul into it. And I want you to pick out, now think about it, what are the things that maybe you didn't appreciate as much at the time that, looking back, you really got out of it, that you enjoyed so much? What are the experiences? Who are the people? What are the big tentpole moments that you pick out and say, that changed my life?
For sure, the relationships I built with some of the guys, and in particular, the guys that I would spend large periods of time in the ring with. Jack Molson, Tommy Swade, Supremely Great, Shane Black. Those were guys I wrestled hundreds of times. They helped train me. I helped train them. We helped train others together. And at the time, you don't realize how big of a bond that is, because you really are putting your life in their hands every time you step into the ring, pretty much. And, during that time period, we watched, unfortunately and sadly, people die in the ring. It happened, at one of our shows. We saw people break their necks. We saw careers end, and we saw careers launch. We were really fortunate to be a part of the beginning of Batista's career. And look, he's part of the Marvel, extended universe now, and in, tons of famous movies. So we've gotten to see and help others achieve those dreams and be there. I think it's what I appreciate more now is those relationships. I definitely do. The opportunities that at that age I didn't have the commitments I have now. So I was able to put stuff in a bag and just leave for a week and go to Nebraska and wrestle there, or Florida, or wherever it was. And I mean, I'll take it back to we talked about this in the first episode. That first moment at the convention center where we walked into that arena after Coco Beware almost killed you, and we sat in the front row. We had front row tickets, don't forget. And the first match, which was Tony Gurria versus, oh my God, come on, Nick, don't blank. Tony Gurria versus, anyway, it'll come to me. I'll look it up. Watching that, experiencing the sound of the ring when you take the bump for the first time, doing that my first time, getting into the ring and having that first match, having you guys there, having Dad there, those are memories. You know, it's funny. Dad's been gone 20 some years at this point. I don't remember a whole lot, and I forget more and more every year, but I can still hear his voice yelling, you know, during matches and being screaming, and that's like yesterday. So I would say those are all the things I kind of take with me. And just how not everybody gets a chance to do that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I find it, you know, fascinating, just coming from a mental perspective, that those are amazing memories. But what I didn't hear you say was when you got to go to WrestleMania and meet some of your legend idols, when you got to be on WWE television for whatever role, you know, and participate in that. Like, those are things people would think, oh, you did a Broadway show. That must have been it. It's not always it. Sometimes it's the little things. It's the relationships. And that's what, you know, that's one of the the few wonderful things about getting older is that perspective that it's granted. But I do want to give you the floor to talk about those other cool things. You did get to attend WrestleMania as a personal guest of this Wild Samoans, and there are some incredible stories about that are a little in the weeds for people who aren't wrestling fans, but I still wanted to give you the floor to talk about it.
So it's one of those awesome occurrences where I was an active wrestler and we were planning shows right when Afa and Sika were getting inducted to the Hall of Fame. Same year that Dusty Rhodes went in, same year that Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler went in. And Afa invited me to come along, with his family to be part of that experience. So we got to stay in Detroit with the wrestlers and attend everything that happens WrestleMania weekend. So this was WrestleMania 23, 20 years after WrestleMania 3, also held in Detroit, Michigan. So Ricky Steamboat was there. Finally got my picture with him, which was a big moment because he's my favorite wrestler. Him and Hulk Hogan, they were my top guys back then. In the early 80s, obviously. But that weekend, I got to sit on Saturday night after Stone Cold Steve Austin's movie premiere with Tina, our sister, who came with us, and we listened to Ric Flair tell stories with the Wild Samoans and Triple H and Shawn Michaels, basically for like 4 hours in a bar all through the night. And there's not much like that, I can tell you. And then be there live at WrestleMania 23 and experience, all of the Shawn Michaels and John Cena in the main event. Be part of the Hall of Fame ceremony and watch those speeches live and see Afa get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Shared a hilarious elevator ride with Booker T that it's one of the funniest things that's ever happened in my life for a 30-second elevator ride, if you can believe it. An amazing experience. And in that same year, like you were saying, I had a chance to work for WWE, Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, ECW, and all of that was great. But again, none of that was ever the real reason why I was doing it. I wanted to be the best match on the show every night. That was my, and those were the things I aimed to do and stories I looked to tell. So, once you get that WWE paycheck, that's a special thing too. You get to say you were part of that. But it was never totally all of that. And Keith, you were talking about Mick Foley. Mick Foley was there, obviously, and we were assigned to the same bus to all the events as Mick Foley. So we also got to be a part of dozens of Mick Foley conversations and trivia competition. Like he would constantly throw out like, okay, what year did Princess Bride come out? And we would all be going back and forth and going there. So again, hundreds of stories, right? Having matches with Batista in the beginning and almost getting killed because he was so large and just new and learning. Wrestling Samu, learning how not to get choked out by Doink the Clown, Ray Apollo. Having Jimmy Snuka tell me after a cage match that I had an excellent cage match and he really enjoyed it. Having King Kong Bundy tell me that he's never seen a principal of the school do a shooting star press before. Stuff that totally awesome if you're a wrestling fan. And if you're not, you're like, whatever, that's weird. Okay, big fat bald guy, whatever, do your thing.
No, that's all real cool. That's all really cool. And it's funny you talk about wanting to have the best match on the card with Foley right next to you, because he talks about that constantly, that was always his objective too. It's like he
Yes.
didn't care if he was first or last. He didn't care if he had 5 minutes or 25. He just wanted to go out there and have the best match on the card.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
a
I
great
think one of the-
microcosm. Like every guy in the promotion, this happens. You hear the saying, the kind of cliche saying, "There's no small parts, only, or there's no small roles, only small people, small actors." And that's the truth. Is sometimes you're not always the guy. You're not always the person in the spotlight. But if you have a spot on the show, or you've got a role, or you're in the chorus, or whatever it is, you've still got a job to do. And you can frame that way a lot of different ways. You can kind of just like muddle through, or you can focus and do the best goddamn thing you can do in your spot. So there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, and it's not just. I'll reference Mick Foley's first book, "Have a Nice Day," which was the first like New York Times bestseller book when wrestling was real big in the late '90s, early 2000s. And when he talked about that, Keith, like wanting to have the best match on the show, it wasn't just planning with the other guy for the match itself. It also involved getting to know and talking to the referee to make sure he was positioned the right way, talking to the cameraman so they know when the big spots in the match are coming, so they're at the right angle to catch when he was going to do his elbow off the mat onto the floor, talking to the commentators. So even if Jerry Lawler, he never wanted to know what was happening. He liked to react in real time. Jim Ross, he wanted to know. So making sure they knew if a big moment was coming. I'll give one quick example of that. Our biggest show of the year was always, it was called Summer. Oh my God, it was, oh my God, why am I blanking? I'm struggling with it with some of my Sports Fest, live on Service Electric Cable. And I was wrestling Tommy Suede, and one sequence of our match involved me hitting him with his finisher and him kicking out, and him hitting me with my finisher and kicking out, and then going into a closing sequence where we then each hit our own finishers. And we had to make sure the announcers, who weren't as familiar with our characters, understood that in several weeks of TV building up to that, we were teasing that. So that let them accentuate and talk that moment like, Zero Gravity just hit Tommy Suede with Tommy Suede's own finishing move. And, Tommy kicks out no one kicks out, that type of thing.
Well, and for the audience who aren't wrestling nerds, a finishing move is the sort of signature move that they finish off an opponent with before you pin them. And kicking out is when they've got you in a pin and you're able to kick your way out of it and not be pinned before 3 happens.
Well, one of the things about professional wrestling that is cool to this day is, despite a lot of the nuance you've heard from us, at its basics, it should be such that you've never watched before, you watch our podcast here, and you're like, I'm going to check it out, and you turn it on. Theoretically, Nick, if people are doing their gigs right, regardless of the big storylines, the meta-arching, whatever, you should be able in the first couple seconds to be like, okay, that's the person I'm supposed to say yay for. That's the person I'm supposed to say boo for, and let the battle begin. You should be able to tell that story through a dance, if you will, right? So not a non-verbal storytelling arc. That is the basic principle.
That's the very basic principle. I mean, unless you've had a storyline, just like anything, right? By the time you get to Avengers Endgame, those characters have nuances, right? That didn't exist maybe in the first Avengers movie. If you're just picking it up at Endgame, you might miss some of that, but you still get that Captain America is the guy who's going to try to kill this big bad guy. So the big picture pieces have to be there. And then you can work the nuance in, but like Keith said earlier, you always have to be aware that part of the audience might just be tuning in today for the first time, and how do you engage them?
And I think that the key to engagement is exactly what you were saying before about wanting to have the best match on the card, and that's investment, and that is giving 100% of yourself to what you are doing. And and I think about this a lot with theater too, especially because Mike's talking about small parts and small roles, that being fully invested in what you are doing and giving everything you can involves, you're right, talk to the camera guy, make sure your costume is right, blah, 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 blah. But it's also, I think, having a good understanding of the whole picture. And, and Foley talks about this too, because it's like, I know where I am in the card. I know what's coming before. I know what's coming after. I know what the purpose of this match is within the entire show, within the purpose of this match, within my program against this other person I'm working with over a course of weeks. So this match is designed to do this job in this show and this job in this program, so that you're fully investing into the bigger picture. So that, if you equate it to theater, right? You're an ensemble person, but you've got one scene where you got to play a bad guy against the lead or whatever, and you look at the whole show in picture. Like, my purpose here is to send the lead character on a journey in this way, to make people feel this way about this character. And it is about giving the best performance for yourself, but it is also being the cog in the wheel that you need to be within the bigger context. And I think the people who do all of that best understand the big picture and their role in it, and then give 1,000% to being exactly the cog that's needed in that moment. And that is really noticeable. It's noticeable when you don't do that, and noticeable when you do that.
Keith,
go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
I just want to say, I think Keith really hit the nail on the head in that in wrestling, right? You have to do that or you won't understand, right? Whereas in a scripted TV show, you can interpret the scene in different ways, but you can't in real time change it, right? Where in wrestling, people can do that, but you've got to hit the mark in a way that fits the moment, or else the whole thing falls flat and doesn't work.
Yeah, and if something goes wrong, you need to know how to fix it live on television.
Yeah, which is a big, and that I'm going to have a question for Keith later that kind of brought up on me. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, so we've talked a lot about from your perspective, the in-ring performance, the improvisational nature, as well as the premeditated nature of your performance. But another thing, to zoom out a little bit, that I think that wrestling as a whole is doing great now, in fact, has improved greatly as they're struggling or as they're evolving to find a new way of storytelling using this sort of old tenets. One thing they are helped by is incredible advances, and I would say industry-leading advances in production value. Whereas I think Fox and ESPN and TBS and the different networks are taking lessons from WWE specifically in how to package a sporting event. You'll notice these 8K videos, shallow depth of field videos following players in the World Series or in the NFL. That started by camera angles and following on WWE. The packages that precede matches. So if you go to a pay-per-view in wrestling, you haven't watched at all. So you don't know who these two guys are, and you don't know the story they've been telling for literally a year to get to this point. Better than any other sport or product on television or previously you see on any network or streaming service. The WWE has honed this to a perfect chef's kiss package of how to tell a year-long story in clips, voiceover, animation, and music. A perfect encapsulation of a full storyline within a 30-second spot to a minute. And they do it for every match, on every card, and they are the kings. And oftentimes, they recap it at the end, or they recap the match using live footage captured. So their guys in the booth or in the truck or in the studio are better than anybody in the business.
Unbelievable.
Anybody in the business. Yeah. And they are leading the charge in AR, which is augmented reality. So video or hologram being displayed on screen that you don't actually see in person. It's off the camera. So I think in many ways, the production is outpacing the evolution of the in-ring product. And so I just wanted to bring that up, Nick. I know you agree.
Absolutely. And Keith, I mean, this is something I think is definitely more in your wheelhouse, but I would say, bar none, no one does it better than WWE does it. Not even close. Everything you said is 100% accurate. It's perfect.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's remarkable the storytelling acumen that you have there, and I think what makes wrestling different than a lot of these the movies and TVs and film is that it's so immediate. They're at least my understanding is like they rarely have a plan 3 weeks out. They're working on what's coming up on Sunday, right? And so so much can change and grow. Somebody can get injured, throws the whole thing off. A character hits that you're not expecting to hit. Stone Cold Steve Austin, perfect example. I mean, he got his opportunity because of an incident that happened. He wasn't involved in. Put him in the opportunity, and that's Austin 316 came out of just sort of happenstance. Or something doesn't work that you're expecting. You've got to change it. You've got to adapt. You've got to think on your feet. Like Foley, right? His character was never supposed to be a babyface. An interview and how they edited the interview and showed it over with Jim Ross turned Mankind from a monster to a babyface in 5-minute interview clips, just storytelling, because they're able to adapt to what they're seeing in front of them. I mean, like, oh my God, we have something here. And then you adapt again, right? If body starts breaking down, you can't take the crazy bumps. A sock? We'll make that a finishing move that can take out The Rock. I mean, it's crazy.
Yep.
And that is, again, what I find so fascinating about it.
It was sort of it became reality television before real reality television, where the audience interpretation and audience response directly affects the creative evolution of a certain angle or a certain character. Whereas, and that's great, and that's exciting, and it's I think emboldening to many viewers to have that sort of visceral impact on the product you're watching. Now, it has its drawbacks, as I think Nick would agree, that when you give a certain fan base too much input on the product, then they feel they feel that they have a creative control and are thus more likely to rebel against certain creative decision making. So that's a delicate balance, Keith. It's like saying if you're writing a musical, and every night, due to audience response, you had to make edits, or the audience felt like they had to direct. That could be a problem.
Well, and I was actually thinking of just that, because audience response for a musical matters too, up until a point. I mean, that's why that in theater for professional production, you have previews before you open, and on Broadway you have four weeks of previews, and while you're doing that, you're still rewriting. So I'm getting a crazy response from this song. Like I think we're gonna cut it, but then wow, it has this response, or or something that is not working. Like I got to come up with a new opening number because it's not reacting. And so the audience, there is a dance there, but at some point it gets locked, right? And it doesn't happen throughout the performance itself, because in wrestling, in the first 15 minutes of a pay-per-view, they might have to rewrite the end of the pay-per-view based on what happens in that first 15 minutes. If, something runs long or something runs short, or,
somebody walks out.
Somebody walks out, and there's an element of chaos. You don't usually have Alpha Butt quit halfway through the show, but that's happened in wrestling.
Well, and it used to be that the two worlds are so intertwined. It used to be that week TV wasn't as frequent, and you had the non-televised shows, which are called house shows. You had the chance to build characters and play storylines and test all that stuff. So that way you kind of knew when you got to television or pay-per-view that you were going to get a certain type of reaction. There's so much content now being produced that you're testing it in real time. And sometimes on the fly, you got to make some changes. And there are times when you do have to listen to the crowd and kind of go with it. Perfect example, I guess WrestleMania 17, when The Rock and Hogan fought, and the crowd went with Hogan, turned on The Rock. Then Triple H had just won the title. They had been building that up, and they switched it a month later to give Hogan that big, play the hot hand. That happens in pro wrestling quite a bit. When Daniel Bryan became world champion again at WrestleMania, that was an organic movement that John Cena and some others saw coming, right? But that no one else really wanted to acknowledge, and they had to. There was no choice but to change it because the crowd response was so visceral. And let's go back to that. Like you're when you're previewing that Broadway show, if every crowd in every preview feels the same way about a certain moment, you're probably going to change it. And then,
Yeah.
but like you said, at a certain point, it does get locked, and then you got to kind of have to ride the wave.
Well, and what you also realize is how sometimes a small change can make a gigantic difference. I mean, there's a great story from My Fair Lady when it was in previews on Broadway, and there's the song "On the Street Where You Live," right? Favorite song, and while they were in previews, the song got no response. They're like, are we gonna have to cut this? I thought this was a really good song. It was great. And they realized right before they were about to cut the song that we didn't know who the character was who was singing it. Like, we'd seen him peripherally, but we didn't know who he was yet. We had no investment in him. So they added a 30-second scene with that character 10 minutes before the song. Like, this is who this is what his deal is. Then instantly people reacted to the song completely different. Not a note was changed, not a performance was changed, but the audience knowing who that guy was singing it completely changed it, and it was a top 10 hit.
I didn't know that story. Huh.
I didn't either until recently, and I think a lot of you see that in wrestling as well. Sometimes just giving a little bit of backstory, a little bit of context, and not to keep harping on Foley. He's my favorite wrestler, but giving the context of him as the teenager, as Dude Love, and being able to show footage of him jumping off of his house like an idiot. It was a 10-second clip, but it gave us context to learn about who this person is, and it informed every one of the characters that he performed the rest of his life. And as an audience member, like, oh God, this literally is his childhood dream. We can see it. We can see who this guy is, and that informs each of the crazy characters that he's playing. And we now have a relationship with Mick on top of Mankind and Cactus Jack and Dude Love, and just that little piece of context unlocks everything.
Yeah, well, that jumps into a territory though where it can go the other way, right? Like, so in my opinion, in this universe now where it's more content, they tried to branch out. They put the Bellas on E, and and John Cena's on. He's got a reality show, and the network's got 17. So, to me, that stuff was oversaturating and was. I wanted more focus on the in-ring character and on the in-ring storytelling, and less of this peripheral crap. But I guess your content, your mileage may vary. It's a, like we said earlier, it's a very difficult needle to thread.
Well, and there's a difference, I think, Mike, between professional wrestlers becoming reality stars versus movie stars, reality stars, celebrities becoming part of the professional wrestling world. So, the Bellas, I forget what the other show, the Ms. and Mrs., some of those reality shows, that's supposed to be centered around a world that already exists. So that's almost more for the meta fan, or should be. And I agree. They tried to bring too much of that into storyline. However, the WWE normally does a great job of the opposite direction, right? Right now, they're doing great work with Logan Paul, embracing the whole YouTube celebrity situation. They did that before. Not, again, your mileage may vary, but a perfect instance of a success is Pat McAfee. He is, and he's currently off because he's doing this Saturday college football stuff right now, but he's as over as anyone in wrestling right now. And that's not even his main gig. So that passion, I think, does translate. When you say this was... Go ahead, Keith, sorry.
No. I was just going to say that, I think the difference between what you see in Pat McAfee or the Foley's thing versus these reality shows is authenticity, is reality, right? It's the quality of it is determined by the authenticity, by oh, that's for real. It's not like, you're not manufacturing fake reality to give more context. You're showing the actual truth. And I think that authenticity and that passion is like what you said, is what it's sort of all about.
And isn't that life? Right? Any career, any scope, any project, anything where there's a real passion and you're being your authentic self, even if you don't know what that is, I think it shines through in a final product a lot of times. That's the difference between Mick Foley, when they talk about his childhood dream, and years prior when it was Shawn Michaels' childhood dream to win the title.
Right, which was utter nonsense.
Utter nonsense. Can't even compare the two.
And you can tell. You don't have any way of telling except for your own instinctual reaction to authenticity, which is it's subtextual, it's ethereal, but it's
you've got some
real
performers.
true.
Like there was a promo not long ago. I won't get too specific, or if you want to, we can. But where there was a character, I believe it was AEW, talking about bullying and how he was bullied, and they've really played it as a specific, authentic realization, which to me read insincere, and because it was insincere, it read exploitative. But at the same time, I don't know his actual experience. So they've always tried to toe the line of blurring the lines. And so, it's like you said, Keith. I mean, they made a big deal when they changed it from the Divas to women's champion, right? And they were going down a very much more inclusive route and trying to do away, not do away with and maybe not ignore, although they do that as well. You try to erase some history, but just change course. Yet that comes directly in the face of hypocritically going into the Saudi regime and allowing them to dictate how the women could dress. So we live in a time that it's difficult to try to make a right decision without being called a hypocrite. Like it's just, we're in a tough, it's difficult right now. It's always been, and it will continue to get harder to evolve in real time under such lens. It's like you said, Nick, there used to be an opportunity to road test some stuff before it made it to that main audience. But now with Twitter and social media, that doesn't exist. Everything that happens, even signing autographs in the back, you're getting video recorded. Everybody knows everything at all times. And that's a difficult way to try to create on the fly, right?
Which is why I think, in terms of the success or failure of characters or a change and that kind of stuff, I would imagine it's very similar to acting, to being a politician, to being whatever it is, to make it authentic in some way, right? And that even if you're playing a character who is very different from you, most of the time, if you're going to give a good performance, you're feeling real feelings, right? You find some way to connect it to you. There's some people who act by like, oh, this reminds me of the time my cat died, so that's how I'm crying. Some people act through sort of empathy, like really putting yourself in the foot of your character, and then you're able to empathically feel the feelings. And I imagine that, that anything that is based in an emotional truth, even if it's sort of tangential, even if it's running parallel to the track, it reads as authentic. It's for real, or if you're a politician, you're giving a speech, if you actually give a shit about what you're talking about, it's going to read wildly different than you're opportunistically just putting out talking points that you either don't believe or you don't really understand what you're talking about. That authenticity can make us believe that a dirty old sock can take out the rock. Authenticity can make us believe, and it's not so much that it's real or that Mick Foley really believes it's possible, but he finds a part of him that believes, a part of him that can tap into that and make it authentic, make it real.
I think it speaks to the true nature of fiction and escapism, in that I'll give you an example you just used, Keith. In politics, all right, so across all spectrums, politics, any type of performance, which I think politics is in many ways is that as well.
For sure.
There is something very magical and special and unexplainable about, some people call it it factor, some people call it charisma. People who just have something that can capture people's attentions and can exacerbate and elevate their feelings. When you combine that with a person who's able to tap into whatever the general feeling of the masses are at the time, you have a spark plug. You have some sort of explosion. Example, we'll use Trump, right? he was able to capture, but we're not talking about charisma. He was able to capture the sentiment, to embody a negative sentiment of a large body of people and sort of personify it. And that is very dangerous, can be very dangerous depending on in real life. However, when we talk Stone Cold during the Attitude Era, the idea of everybody, the blue collar type folks wanted to say F you to the elites, to their boss, to the rich folk. And you couple that sentiment of his character with his just natural raw ass charisma, it's explosive. And because we are firmly in the fantasy fulfillment fictional universe, you can enjoy it. You can indulge in it. And I think that's another reason I love professional wrestling, because it allows that escapism without the stakes.
Well, I think you've actually tapped onto something really powerful, and that is the sense of victimization, right? And whether it's Trump exploiting that, or Stone Cold, the same thing. Like, in a feud, he's going up against Mr. McMahon. I'm being victimized by these circumstances, by whatever. And then you have that sort of wish fulfillment. You get to beat up your own boss. You get to
you want to drive your RV down into the building and just start grabbing beers and chugging them as you drop your 75-year-old a stunner on your 75-year-old boss. Like, that's stupid and awesome.
But it's so, these are elemental feelings to the human experience, and you're tapping into that. And like you said, it can be used harmlessly, like this. It can be used productively. It can be used destructively, and we are all susceptible to those elemental feelings, especially when you have somebody with that electric charisma that is just so on the other end of the political spectrum, however you feel about the politics of it, I went to go see Cory Booker speak this last weekend, and he, I was like right there, I was like 5 feet away from the guy, and electricity, just he wasn't even saying anything particularly spectacular or whatever. He was just sort of talking to a crowd, but you could just feel that type of electric charisma, and you're like, oh my God, it's almost overwhelming. Regardless of whatever the topic is, that type of charisma is so magical, and and
it's hard to replicate. So everyone's saying, like, who's the next Hulk Hogan? Who's the next Stone Cold? Who's the next Rock? It's not going to be that. It's going to be the next something different, because you can't replicate that type of energy. You can't look at, and people do that in politics all the time. Like, they study political figures and say, I'm going to try to be a Teddy Roosevelt, or I'm going to try to embody it doesn't work like that. You can't pull that. There's a slightly, I don't want to get too far off the rails, but I watched Barbarian, the movie, a few nights ago. It's on HBO Max now. It's one of these $4 million budget, but was getting a lot of undertone, a lot of buzz in the Halloween movie segment. And it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, because the notion of there's good versus evil, right? And in wrestling, a lot of times it's the good guy versus the bad guy. And then you have what we call tweeners, right? Who kind of play both sides of that. And then you have to find the right balance of all of that. And it's a safe place to do it. Well, this movie takes all those tropes, right? Puts them all out there in front of you, tries to get you to make judgments about it, and then totally shreds it to pieces. It goes in a completely different direction. And whether you liked it or not, right? Like, it wasn't what I expected. However, I appreciated tremendously that, okay, they recognize the things that work about movies, TV characters, and societal, the current nature of society, whether that's with the Me Too movement, whether it's the far right, the far left. They touch on all of that, but they do it in a way that's totally safe, and you can enjoy it, and then you can laugh a little bit afterwards and say, okay, this was a good, safe place to do that. And I guess I haven't thought about that very often. Like, this part of the conversation is kind of like, I never really noticed that there's so much of this that really is not wish fulfillment per se, but just a safe way to express or get rid of pent up steam, emotion, etc.
Well, it's for as complex and deep and intertwined a species we are, we're also pretty simple at the same time. And I think people who are able to hold both of those ideas together, there's great power in that, whether it's storytelling, whether it's politics, whether it's sports, whether it's whatever. How do you connect with people, understanding that everybody is individual and complex and deep and has this incredibly, interwoven story going back their entire lives and generations of their family. And we're also animals, right? And like there are some basic like archetypes, like a smash animal with rock, neighboring tribe comes to my cave and I want to kill them, and that's sports, right? That's the Eagles suck, go Giants, right? That's politics, that's this, and it's watching Superman, right? Battling the good guys and the bad guys. Like, it is all the same stories over and over again, because we have four basic things that we care about and want in life, and it's just art, entertainment, sports, politics. They're all just exploiting, do I want to punch it? Do I want to make out with it? Do I want to eat it? I mean, that's kind of it, right?
To continue on this esoteric path, because I think it's very interesting. Wrestling also
Maybe
professional
all
wrestling.
three.
Professional wrestling.
I mean, that's good evening, right?
Is in its purest form. What I think what's really interesting about it also, Nick, is, all right, so in concept, there's a winner and a loser every match, right? And in general sports, you want to win. Winning is what you want to do. Now, but the legends in this business recognize that win or lose, that's not the point. It's the story you're telling, right? So you go, and that's why it used to be the fact that when you retired, you went out on your back, you laid down, you did the job 1, 2, 3. You let the young potential new hotness, beat you to further his self to perpetuate the business. Now, ego gets involved. People get more, want more, acquire more. I want to be champ longer. I don't want to give up the belt. I don't want to lose to him. That happens. But the legends, right? The reason the business continued, right, is because there was a certain rules, and the rule was, you want to draw big money. You want to be the bad guy. You want to be the best bad guy you possibly can, so that eventually, when you lose to the good guy, the audience feels the release. You make all the money, and everybody wins, right? That sort of is the great idea in life, right? Is that if we all centralize the goal, we can all win. Unfortunately, other things get in the way, but I do like that wrestling is sort of a microcosm of that.
Well, and there's also, I mean, 100%, yes. But there also, in wrestling, you have the like going over versus getting over. And, do you win the match or do you win the crowd? Because those things are not always the same thing. And what is your larger objective? I mean, like, Stone Cold, his match with what's his name? Hart. With Bret Hart, right? He lost that match, right? When he got cut, and like he lost that match. It also flipped him from a heel to a babyface, did the same thing for Bret Hart, and made him, like, if he wasn't already a legend from Austin 316, that made him, he lost that match. But it's one of the most iconic moments of, like, the audience just already primed to love him, now are just, like, completely and utterly engrossed in him and his character. And it's like, it is, I mean, all of our favorite wrestlers, I think, know how to lose in a way that supports them and their opponent and whatever. And there's a lesson there, right? It's like, you don't always have to win if you fail well. If you fail at it's an opportunity. It's a chance for growth. I I wrote a show called I Got Fired, where I got literally fired, and I failed in an interesting enough way to succeed by writing a show about it.
And that's a growth mindset as well. Like
Right.
taking and people can relate to that. Like if you look back at Stone Cold's run, he didn't win all the time. You know what I
No.
mean? Like they had to continually set up scenarios where the odds were stacked against him. And part of the reason his character worked was, he was bucking the authorities, but he also wasn't giving in to the victim mentality of, well, this is unfair. The odds are unfair. He just every week went out and kept at it and kept going. And, that's an example of that piece of it where the intelligence part of the business also says, if the story is good, or even if it's bad, it doesn't matter if I win or if I lose, right? I just have to, did the crowd like what they saw? Do they want more of it?
Right.
Hulk Hogan held the title for 3 years, right? Most of the opponents he faced, if you really look back on it, weren't credible threats to his title. Yet he worked matches in a way that made you believe, oh, he could lose. Like, will he be able to win? And he doesn't get enough credit for that, looking back on it, because he's looked at as, he was always out for himself. Well, yeah, he was. But at the same time, a lot of people made a lot of money because that worked at that time.
Well, and they needed to feed a heel factory for him to continue to find ways to, make you think he might lose. to somehow be an underdog when it's obvious he's going to win.
Or the Undertaker's a great example, right? Like, he's got the streak in WrestleMania or whatnot, but like, regardless of that, who knows how many matches the Undertaker won or when he lost? It had literally nothing to do with whether he won or lost, right? It was all about the anticipation he built.
About the entrance, baby.
The entrance, ultimately the entrance and his finisher, right? Just great examples of and just the decades now. It's much like I bring up the circus a lot. I really think there's a lot of parallels to the circus, to the freak show, to that sort of just like carnival barking, and then you're under the big top and you have to deliver. The business has remained, I would think you would agree, Nick, other than kayfabe, which is the idea of that they didn't always let people know it was predetermined. It was always, they were sort of, they let people believe it was real. Nothing much has changed, ultimately, right? It's pretty much been in its original form from the get. And now it's I don't know. I want to close the conversation just asking you, do you think it can perpetuate as is, or does it have to evolve now because of our media landscape? We started talking about this last time. We didn't get to it, so I want to see now.
I think it has to be. I think it's two things. I think both companies, AEW and WWE. WWE, obviously, that's the $1 billion juggernaut. They have gone all in on it is our name brand that is the star. It's not going to be any one star anymore. We don't need a Hogan, an Austin, a Rock. So what they're going to have to do is keep telling compelling stories that people want to see. And they are going to have, at some point, they are going to have to start doing more of a variety of styles similar to what you see in AEW. The current model of bringing people directly into NXT, teaching them the WWE way, and then wrestling that way, that's great, but you've got to also have those different influences. Like every once in a while, you've got to see a real lucha match, a real trios match. You have to see a real hard-hitting Japanese style match that's impact and striking and things like that. Like there has to be room for growth, and those guys can do all that, and so can the girls too. So I would say the future is going to depend on obviously the big money contracts with your Foxes, your USAs. They need to keep being creative, diving into the NFTs. They're big into that right now. They're really trying to stray into those markets. But when it comes down to it, just like anything else, they've got to stay relevant, and it has to be engaging content. Otherwise, just like anything else, you're not going to care.
Last question from me, then I'll let Keith close it out with a final question or two. Will you come back on the Patreon show and bring 5 of your top action figures from the Wrestling Federation from days gone by so we can look at them, just overanalyze them, and talk about them? Would you come back for us?
I mean, do I even have to answer that question?
All right. Keith, you want to pip and pop for some
Yeah,
final question
I
or
mean,
two?
Oh, wait,
I mean,
also, what is it? How do we get like with these Patreons? I've seen the Keith and Mike action figures. How do we get a zero gravity action figure? That's the only thing
ooh,
I don't have from the world of professional wrestling. I've got replica title belts. I've got match cards from when I did it, but I don't have an action figure.
need an action figure. Well, Christmas is coming. We'll see. Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Oh, it's the coolest. Yeah. No. Fair enough. So this is sort of like a stupid question, but it's always sort of fascinated me. Maybe it's a whole episode. Do you think we'll ever get color in the WWE again?
This is a full disclosure, full honesty show, right, Keith?
Oh yeah.
I believe in blood. I believe in color. But I believe in it when it accentuates a story to the level it did for Bret Hart and Steve Austin. I'm not a fan of blood otherwise. In fact, I wouldn't. That's one of the things I refused to do when I wrestled, because that wasn't. I always felt like my character, the way my stories were told, it wouldn't add anything to the match. And from a health perspective, even if you do it right, it's still dangerous. I mean, God forbid you get an infection. Like, it happens. These guys, it does happen. I think you will start seeing more in WWE, but I think you'll see it in very precise spots that are going to be big spots. And you're only going to see it in big time, high level matches. You'll see Brock Lesnar, like Bobby Lashley and Brock Lesnar right now have a thing going. I think that's the type of match you'll see blood in. When Cody and Roman finally lock horns, when that build happens, I think you're going to see color in that type of match. Aside from that, in the WWE, I don't think you're going to see it at the smaller scale ever gain traction, but I bet you do start seeing it in big moments.
Okay, interesting. Because that was always something that fascinated me, that I was like, wait, they do that? And just for the audience, if you don't know, yes, it means intentionally cutting yourself to have blood be part of the match. And like, you can, if you go back and watch, it's been a part of wrestling since the dawn of time. And it was, and in the WWE, WWF, and in WCW, it sort of came and went based on whether or not they were allowed to. It's because, McMahon banned it in the early 80s. Then during the Attitude Era in the 90s and early 2000s, it was all over the place. Then he banned it again. And so, part of that's TV contract stuff, right? Because they want to be TV 14, not TV MA or whatever. But it was always such a fascinating part.
Insiders tip for you, Keith. So if in a match where you're going to do blood, because Mike was big into magic, right? Like the magician, the Harry Houdini type stuff. Two things that I find really fascinating about getting color. One is it's a very intricate process, and I know you hear a lot of podcasts like, well, there's not really much to it. That's a lie, because we spent a lot of time learning how to do it properly. Because you can get bad color that doesn't really look good or add anything to it. And the ability, even in a non-televised match, when you're getting color, it's obviously you're doing something. Like, even if you're just laying there while you're getting ready to use the razor blade to cut yourself, your opponent, the referee, or someone else has to cause a distraction so you don't know that's what's happening, right? That's sleight of hand. That's a trick. The other piece is, most of the guys wear tape on their wrists, and they just basically put a layer of tape. They put the razor blade, like you would see in a util knife or whatever, and then they put a layer on top of that, and then they can pull it out when they need it. They'll usually wrap a little bit of tape around the side so you can tell which side's sharp and which side's not. I was always a bigger fan of giving the blade to the referee and having the referee hand it over, because to me, that's a razor blade right by your wrist.
Right.
Not the best idea. That's just me. I don't know.
Oh yeah, best the best version or the best like magic trick I think I've ever seen, and I've been a fan for almost 2 years, but Shawn Michaels Undertaker first Hell in the Cell, where he flips him into the cage and he gets color on his way to face planting in the cage, so that it's not like he face plants, goes down, gets color. He is in the air and somehow does it. It's astounding.
Shawn Michaels is something special. Something special.
Really is. Really is.
Well, folks, we're going to talk to Nick again, so don't worry about that. But if you've even remotely enjoyed this conversation, wrestling's all over YouTube. You don't have to watch. I mean, it's the general programming is available on television, but YouTube a couple clips. It's an interesting journey. You could watch Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler. That's a great fictional account of a wrestler, a retired wrestler who's kind of dealing with some of the things we talked about today.
And actually, a lot of the people I talked about today, Mike, are in that movie. Afa trained Mickey Rourke for the role, so
it's all over the place.
Tommy Swade's in there.
You don't have to be into just the punch, kick. There are some stories to be told from. As Keith mentioned in last week's episode, there's tales from the turnbuckle. What's it called?
Dark Side of the Ring.
Dark Side of the Ring. The spinoff you were talking about.
The Tales from the Territories.
Tales from the Territories. So that's out there right now. Check it out. It's an interesting art form. There's some great moments.
Beyond the Mat is a great place to start.
Yep. And there's
Resurrection
podcasts all
of
over
Jake
the place.
the Snake was great. Like DDP. Like I showed that to Jillian, and she couldn't care less about anything, but she really got into it.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys, it's whereas there are some athletes in the professional realm who have been training their whole lives to be football players, baseball players, and whatnot, and a lot of professional wrestlers not in the highest echelons, but through the minor leagues, as I would say, and a lot of the guys Nick ran with come from very blue collar backgrounds, and so they had to struggle a whole different way. And that's sort of the Mickey Rourke movie. Anyway, long story short. We're geeking about wrestling because it's something we really love, and I have a suspicion we'll talk about it more in the future. So thanks.
Yeah. We're gonna have to. Like, there's so much we gotta.
There's so much to talk to. I mean, also my favorite part about it is the stereotype of wrestlers being dumb, but the successful ones, they are real. Jake the Snake, real smart.
Yeah,
Mick Foley, brilliant. Like real smart people.
Well, smart businessmen too. I mean, you've got your Dave Batistas, you've got your John Cenas, you've got your The Rocks. I mean, they ain't dumb guys. They are multi-million-dollar empires now, and then not just because they're dumb lugs slamming each other. If you'd like to be a dumb lug slamming us some money, you can do so. Patreon.com/K&M. Thanks to all of our patrons. Wanted to make sure they got a shout out today. That's Casey Clark, Brian Coughlin, CloudLover69, Jason Moe, Andrew Hayes, Jorge Navoa, and the mysterious Ann. Wharfs, Boot Chivs, CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, Acrim Toys, Delusions at Noon. Thanks for being who you are. You can also be
why is Ann mysterious?
Because that's all we know about her, Nick. That's it.
You know what it is? It's mysterious.
Yeah, that's the mystery. The mystery is just Ann in general. We don't know anything
It's
about her.
mysterious.
I know nothing about Patreon, so I find all of this fascinating.
These people give us money for our shit to break, so that's
for more stuff.
It. Yeah, which we got to get on, Keith. We got to get on.
Yes, indeed.
All right, kids. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back. K&M Weekly, Geekly. We're here every week. I'm not doing the transition because no one's given me a good one yet.
Come on, give me a tag. You got to give us a tag, Mike.
Okay. Hey, do you need to geek your sneak? Give us a peek. You deek week, neek a leak.
What?
Zeeky deek deek, deekity week. We'll see you next week.
Okay, we're going to take Mike to the hospital for the seizure. Until then.
Go Phils, maybe. Who knows? Bye.
Woo, that'd be great.